87 dreadnoughts, 40,000 civilians, no treaties, no backup, no hope.
Together
Or
we
so
stand
the
against
Kree
the
Empire
darkness.
thought.
United in
The
hope,
sky
we
above
will
the Valkyrie
prevail
Prime was
to
not
victory.
supposed to burn. For 10,000 years, it had been a canvas of deep violet and silver stars, a quiet corner of the galaxy where peaceful species built their homes, mapped the nebulas, and minded their own business. The Valkyrie were explorers. They were healers. They were not fighters. The Kree Empire knew this. That was why they came. There was no declaration of war, no list of demands. At 0400 planetary time, the fabric of space simply tore open. The Kree fleet poured out of the void like a plague of black locusts. Their ships were massive, brutalist wedges of dark metal and glowing red energy lines designed for a single purpose: absolute subjugation. Within minutes, the orbital defense platforms were vaporized. The burning debris rained down on the capital city, streaking the violet sky with trails of ash and fire. On the surface in the docking bay of the last refugee transport, Captain Vera watched the planetary shield flicker. It was a faint, translucent blue dome holding back the fury of 87 warships. It was failing. Beside her stood Elder Kalen. He was ancient, his green scales dulled by time, his back bowed under the weight of 9 decades. He leaned heavily on a metal walking frame, his yellow eyes fixed on the burning sky. "The shield integrity is at 20%, Elder," Vera said. Her voice shook, but she forced her hands to remain steady on the ship's control console. "The Kree Commander Vornak. He is broadcasting on all open channels. He demands unconditional surrender." Kalen made a sound deep in his chest, a slow grinding exhale. "The Kree do not take prisoners, Vira. They take slaves, and when the slaves are broken, they take their lives. Then we die here." "Perhaps," Kalen whispered. His trembling hand reached into the folds of his robes. He pulled out a small, rectangular device. It was an antique, heavy metal, scratched, completely alien to Valkyrie design. "Or perhaps we remind the universe that a debt unpaid is a debt unforgiven." Vera looked at the object. She recognized it from the stories. Everyone in their family knew the stories. "Grandfather, that was 40 years ago. They are light years away. They have their own borders to protect. They will not come." "Transmit the code," Kalen commanded. His voice suddenly possessed the strength of a much younger man. "Transmit it on the widest frequency. Maximize the power output. Let the void hear it." Vira hesitated for only a second. She took the heavy metal recorder, patched it into the transport's main communication array, and hit send. The ancient distress signal shot outward, piercing the failing planetary shield, racing across the dark expanse of the galaxy at the speed of light. A prayer in the dark. 6,000 light years away, the Earth was quiet. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, inside the reinforced bunker of United States Space Command in Colorado Springs, the hum of mainframe servers was the only sound. Admiral Thaddeus Sterling did not like politicians. He did not like press briefings. He liked machinery, and he liked his people. At 45, his dark hair was heavily salted with gray at the temples. He had the thick, scarred hands of a man who had started in the engine rooms before he ever sat in a command chair. Currently, the commander of the United States Deep Space Fleet was up to his elbows in the wiring of a secondary holographic projector. "Admiral," a voice said. Sterling didn't look up. He adjusted a fiber optic coupling with a pair of pliers. "I told maintenance I had this, Lieutenant. The automated diagnostics are too slow. A man needs to feel the wire to know where the short is." "Sir, it's not the projector." The tone of the young lieutenant's voice made Sterling stop. It was tight, edged with a very specific kind of professional panic. Sterling wiped the grease from his hands with a rag and stood up to his full 6'2" height. "Report. We just caught a signal off the deep space listening posts on the edge of the Artemis sector. It bypassed the standard digital filters. Sir, it triggered a Code Black protocol." Sterling frowned. Code Black was an emergency designation reserved for catastrophic events. A fallen colony, a lost fleet. "Is it the Kree?" "We don't know, sir. The encryption it's analog. It took the computer a full minute to recognize the syntax because it's 40 years out of date. It's a distress beacon accompanied by a voice file." "Play it." The lieutenant tapped his console. The pristine acoustics of the command center were suddenly filled with the hiss and pop of ancient static. Then a voice cut through the noise. I am Commander Ilara Sterling of the United States Space Corps. Today, Captain Kalin and the crew of the Valkyrie ship, General Current, saved 12 American lives. They risked their careers and their freedom to help strangers. Humanity remembers its friends. We will not forget. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Thaddeus Sterling stared at the main screen. The grease rag slipped from his fingers and hit the polished floor. It had been 10 years since he had heard that voice. 10 years since he stood by a hospital bed and watched his mother breathe her last. She had been a legend, a pioneer, and she would have died in the freezing dark of space 40 years ago, along with her entire crew if an alien captain hadn't broken the laws of his own government to pull her battered ship into his cargo bay. Sir, the lieutenant whispered, there's more. A secondary transmission attached to the audio file. It's translating now. Text scrolled across the massive display screen. Valkyrie Prime is falling. CRE Empire attacking in force. Shields at critical. We remember our friends, do you? Sterling looked at the timestamp. The message had been sent mere hours ago. Bring up tactical mapping of the Artemis sector. Show me Valkyrie Prime. The screen shifted. A three-dimensional map materialized. Red dots surrounded a single green sphere. 87 Kree warships. The lieutenant read his voice hollow. Dreadnought class, they're blockading the planet. The Valkyrie don't even have a standing military. Just a few patrol boats. Time until their planetary shield collapses. Based on the Kree weapon output, 4 hours, 5 tops. After that, it's orbital bombardment, a complete planetary glassing. There are 40,000 civilians trapped at the spaceport alone. Sterling felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. The Kree. He had read the intelligence reports. They were a conquering swarm. They took what they wanted and burned the rest. The United States had maintained a tense, silent distance from Kree territory, avoiding a war that the politicians deemed too costly. Get me the Pentagon, Sterling said. His voice was low, dangerous. Get me General Hayes, priority 1. 2 minutes later, the secure holographic table hummed to life. The flickering, life-sized image of General Hayes appeared. Hayes was a man who lived by spreadsheets, treaties, and risk assessments. A man who had never smelled the ozone of a burning command deck. Admiral Sterling, I'm in the middle of a Joint Chiefs briefing. This better be a verified planetary threat. It's the Valkyrie General. The Kree Empire has them surrounded. They're systematically wiping out their colonies, and the homeworld falls in 4 hours. I am requesting authorization to mobilize the 3rd and 5th carrier strike groups. We need to jump now. Hayes stared at the hologram of Sterling. He didn't blink. Request denied. Sterling stepped closer to the projection table. General, they are slaughtering civilians, unarmed refugees. And that is a tragedy, Admiral, a profound galactic tragedy, but it is not an American tragedy. We have no mutual defense treaty with the Valkyrie. We have no strategic assets in that sector. The Kree Empire commands an armada of over 5,000 ships. If we engage them to save a handful of aliens, we drag the United States into a full-scale interstellar war. A handful of aliens? Sterling's voice vibrated with a suppressed rage that made the junior officers in the room step back. 40 years ago, 12 American astronauts were cooking to death in a leaking reactor. My mother was one of them. The Valkyrie broke their own highest laws to save them. They didn't ask for a treaty. They didn't calculate the political risk. They saw people dying, and they acted. And we sent them a very nice diplomatic thank you package. Hayes shot back, his tone hardening. The debt was acknowledged, but I am not trading the lives of 10,000 American sailors today for a rescue mission that happened 4 decades ago. I gave them our word, General. Commander Sterling looked them in the eye and promised that humanity would remember. We promised. One dead astronaut made a promise she had no authority to make. It does not bind the United States military. Hayes pointed a rigid finger at Sterling. You are to maintain standard patrol routes. If you move so much as a single destroyer toward the Artemis sector, I will have you stripped of your rank, court-martialed for treason, and locked in Leavenworth until the sun burns out. Do I make myself perfectly clear, Admiral? Sterling looked at the holographic projection. He saw the cold fear of a bureaucrat masquerading as strategic wisdom. He thought about the red dreadnoughts in the sky above Valkyrie Prime. He thought about an old alien leaning on a walking frame waiting for a friend who wasn't going to show up. Crystal clear, General. Sterling severed the connection. The hologram vanished. The command bunker was dead silent. Every officer, every technician at their consoles was staring at Sterling. They had all heard the recording. They all knew the legend of the wandering star. And they all knew what the general had just ordered. Sterling walked slowly to the main observation window, overlooking the massive subterranean hangar. Below him, the sleek gray hulls of American warships rested in their cradles. Machines built for war. Machines built to protect. Lieutenant, Sterling said quietly. Sir, how long to prep the command ship Retribution for a deep space jump? The lieutenant swallowed hard. Sir, the general just said. I know what the general said. How long? 20 minutes, sir. Do it. Sterling turned around to face the room. He walked to the master communication console. Bring the main transmitter offline. Disconnect us from the Pentagon's routing network. Sir, that's a court-martial offense. That's mutiny. It's only mutiny if you follow me, Sterling said, his eyes locking onto the young officers. I am relieving you of duty, Lieutenant. I am relieving all of you. You are ordered to step away from your consoles. Whatever happens next is on me alone. Nobody moved. Not a single officer stepped back. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. He reached out and flipped 3 heavy analog switches. The connection to Washington was severed. We're with you, Admiral. What are your orders? Sterling felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost choked him. These were his people, not the politicians in their tailored suits, but the men and women who actually carried the weight of the sky. Access the mainframe, Sterling ordered. I need you to dig deep. Look for a file path established during the Cold War expansion. It's called the Nightingale Protocol. The technicians' fingers flew across their keyboards. Sir, the Nightingale Protocol. That's an obsolete emergency broadcast system. It bypasses military encryption and opens a direct, unblockable channel to every registered American vessel in the galaxy. Military, commercial, private, industrial. Everything. That's exactly what it is, Sterling said. Boot it up. Admiral, if we activate Nightingale, every ship flying the American flag will hear us. But they aren't under military command. We can't order civilian ships to fly into a combat zone. I'm not going to order them, Sterling said. I'm going to tell them the truth. The main console glowed green. The old system, dormant for decades, roared to life. A microphone icon blinked on Sterling's screen. He had 3 hours left. 3 hours before Valkyrie Prime was reduced to ash. Sterling pressed the broadcast button. He didn't have a prepared speech. He didn't have a teleprompter. He just had the heavy truth in his chest. This is Admiral Thaddeus Sterling, United States Space Command. I am transmitting on the Nightingale open frequency. I am speaking to every American captain, pilot, and navigator currently in the void. He paused, ensuring his voice was dead calm. He had to convey the gravity of the moment. No panic, just cold, hard reality. At this exact moment, the alien species known as the Valkyrie are facing total annihilation. 87 Kree dreadnoughts have them surrounded. Their shields will fail in less than 4 hours. They are unarmed. They are helpless. Sterling took a breath. 40 years ago, a United States exploration vessel suffered a critical reactor failure. 12 Americans were trapped in the dark, dying of radiation poisoning. No one came for them, but the Valkyrie did. They broke the laws of their own government to save our people. They asked for nothing in return. The commander of that American ship was my mother. She told them that humanity remembers its friends. She gave them her word. He looked up at the massive screens staring at the red dots surrounding the lone green planet. The Pentagon has ordered the military to stand down. They say it is not our fight. They say we have no treaty. They are choosing politics over honor. Sterling leaned closer to the microphone. But I know the men and women out there in the dark. I know what built our country. It wasn't treaties. It was the fundamental belief that when the strong prey upon the weak, you stand up. It was the belief that when you give your word, you keep it, even if it costs you everything. He let the silence hang for 3 seconds. A heavy, pregnant pause across the entire galaxy. I am taking the command ship Retribution to Valkyrie Prime. I am going to break the Kree blockade or I am going to die trying. I have no authority to order you to follow me. I cannot promise you victory. I cannot promise you will come home. The enemy is massive and they are merciless. Sterling straightened his back. But I promise you this. If we let them die today, we lose the right to call ourselves Americans. We lose the right to call ourselves human. He tapped the console, attaching the coordinates and his mother's original audio file to the broadcast. The coordinates are attached. I jump in 20 minutes. Who is coming with me? Sterling released the button. The transmission ended. In the command bunker, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the hum of the cooling fans. Sterling stared at the empty radar screen. He had just thrown away his 30-year career. He had just committed high treason, and if no one answered, he was taking a single ship against an armada of 87 dreadnoughts. It was suicide. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. The lieutenant swallowed. Sir, it's a big galaxy. It takes time for the signal to process. And these are civilians, cargo haulers, miners. They aren't soldiers. I know, Sterling said softly. I know. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing ping echoed through the room. A green light illuminated on the master console. Then another. Then 3 more. Sir, the communications officer said, his voice cracking. Incoming transmission. It's the Big Bertha, a Class 4 deep space mining rig out of the asteroid belt. The audio crackled over the speakers. A gruff, gravelly voice filled the room. Admiral Sterling, this is Captain Miller of the Big Bertha. We ain't got military shields, and my crew is mostly roughnecks and mechanics. But we've got industrial plasma drills that can cut through a mile of solid rock. I reckon they can cut through Kree armor just fine. We're dumping our cargo now, rerouting nav computers. See you at the rendezvous. Before Sterling could answer, the console lit up again. And again. The pings started coming so fast they bled into one continuous high-pitched tone of validation. Sir, incoming from the Starlight Dream. It's a luxury passenger liner. Captain says she's offloading her civilian passengers at the nearest station and coming with a skeleton crew. Incoming from the Ironclad, independent freight hauler. Incoming from the Redemption. Sir, that's a maximum security prison transport. Sterling stared at the board. Put the prison transport through. A tired, raspy voice came over the line. This is Warden Gates. Heard your broadcast. We took a vote in the cell blocks. The inmates say they've done a lot of bad things in their lives, but they ain't cowards. They want to fight. The guards agree. We're punching in the coordinates now. The lieutenant at the radar station stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He was staring at his screen in absolute shock. Admiral, you need to see this. Sterling walked over to the tactical display. The map of the galaxy was lighting up. All across the explored sectors, hundreds of tiny green dots were abruptly changing course. They were abandoning trade routes. They were breaking orbit from mining colonies. They were ignoring scheduled deliveries. They were all converging on a single point. I'm reading 40 ships. No, wait, 80, 120. Sir, the count is climbing exponentially. I've got medical frigates, fuel tankers, garbage scows, private yachts. They're grouping up. They're organizing their own strike formations on open channels. Sterling felt a hard lump form in his throat. He looked at the map. It was a chaotic, beautiful swarm of defiance. The Pentagon had said no. The politicians had closed their doors. But the people, the blue-collar workers, the medics, the outcasts, the citizens had answered. Admiral, the communications officer said, holding a hand to his earpiece, I have General Hayes on the secure line. He is screaming. He's ordering military police to storm this bunker and place you under arrest. Sterling didn't even blink. He looked at the junior officers surrounding him. Every single one of them had their hands on their holstered sidearms, standing between the heavy blast doors and their commander. Tell the general, Sterling said, his voice ringing with absolute unbreakable resolve, that he can take it up with my ghost. Seal the blast doors. Initiate the automated defense grid. Nobody gets into this bunker until we are done here. Yes, sir. Sterling turned on his heel and strode toward the private elevator that led to the launch bay of the Retribution. Lieutenant, Sterling called back over his shoulder. Sir, send one final message to the Valkyrie. Text only, narrow beam straight through the Kree blockade. What's the message, Admiral? Sterling stepped into the elevator. The steel doors began to slide shut, reflecting the harsh, fluorescent lights. He looked at the men and women he was leaving behind, the ones holding the line so he could fight. Tell them to hold on, Sterling said. Tell them the Americans are coming. The command deck of the Kree Dreadnought Annihilator was a cathedral of cruelty. It was built of jagged obsidian metal and illuminated by the bleeding red glare of tactical displays. There were no chairs for the bridge crew. The Kree did not believe in comfort. They believed in efficiency. They believed in conquest. General Vornak stood at the center of the deck, his massive armored hands resting on the edge of the hollow table. He was a veteran of 40 planetary campaigns. He had seen the skies of a dozen worlds turn to ash under his command. The Valkyrie were not a conquest. They were an extermination. A pest control operation to clear prime real estate for the Empire. Below him, through the massive viewport, the blue planetary shield of Valkyrie Prime flickered like a dying candle. General, his sensory officer hissed. The Kree spoke in guttural clicks and low growls, a language that sounded like bones grinding together. The local shield matrix is at 7%. 2 more orbital barrages and the grid will collapse. The capital city is exposed. Vornak bared his teeth. It was not a smile. Prepare the plasma batteries. I want the spaceport wiped out first. Let the survivors watch their hope burn before we send down the landing craft. Sir. The sensory officer paused. His scaled fingers danced across the black glass of his console. A rapid warning chime echoed through the red-lit bridge. General, we are detecting a massive spatial anomaly, gravitational displacement on the edge of the sector. Vornak didn't look up from the hologram of the dying planet. A Valkyrie patrol boat limping home to die. No, General, it is massive. Multiple hyperspace windows are opening. 10, 50, 200. General, I am reading over 300 distinct warp signatures. They are dropping out of hyperspace now. Vornak finally raised his head. He looked out the viewport past the ring of his 87 dreadnoughts into the deep black of the void. Space tore open. It did not happen with a single flash, but with a cascading roar of light that blinded the Kree sensors for a fraction of a second. When the glare faded, the void was no longer empty. It was a wall of gray steel. At the vanguard was the Retribution, a United States Space Command supercarrier, its hull scarred from decades of deep space deployment, its massive railguns tracking forward. But it was not alone. Flanking the military behemoth was an armada of absolute chaos. There were no neat lines, there was no standard military symmetry. There was the Big Bertha, a colossal asteroid mining rig, its hull plated in thick industrial slag, its forward plasma drills glowing with the heat of a small sun. There was the Redemption, the blocky, heavily armored prison transport flying with reckless, terrifying speed. There were medical frigates painted with bright red crosses. There were retrofitted garbage scows, sleek private yachts, and massive boxy freight haulers that had uncoupled from their cargo pods to increase their acceleration. 317 American ships, a chaotic, ugly, beautiful swarm of humanity. On the surface of Valkyrie Prime, the ground shook. Captain Vera stood in the dirt of the refugee camp, her hands gripping the metal rails of her transport. She looked up through the failing blue shield. She saw the new stars appear in the sky. Not stars, engines, hundreds of them. Elder Kalen stood beside her, his trembling hands gripping his walker. He squinted his ancient yellow eyes against the sudden glare. He watched the massive gray wedge of the Retribution slide into orbit, placing itself directly between the Kree dreadnoughts and the fragile planet. He heard the crackle of the unencrypted radio frequency bleeding through the planetary comms. It was a language he had not heard in 40 years, but the translator unit at his belt brought the words to life. Valkyrie Prime, this is Admiral Thaddeus Sterling of the United States. Hold your lines, we have the watch. Kalen fell to his knees in the dirt. Vira reached down to help him, but the old man waved her away. Tears, thick and clear, rolled down his scaled cheeks. I told you, Vira, Kalen whispered, his voice cracking with a joy so profound it physically hurt his chest. I told you they remember. They came. The humans came. In the sky above, the Retribution fired. 2 massive tungsten rods accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light by the carrier's magnetic rails slammed into the nearest Kree dreadnought. The alien ship's shields flared blinding white, then shattered like glass. The dreadnought buckled its hull, tearing open venting atmosphere and fire into the vacuum. A cheer erupted across the open human comm channels. On the bridge of the Annihilator, General Vornak did not flinch. He watched his dreadnought burn with cold calculation. He zoomed in the tactical display on the human fleet. They are uncoordinated, Vornak noted, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. More than half of those vessels possess no military-grade shielding. They are civilian craft, mining tools, transports. They have brought a mob to fight an army. General, the human flagship is hailing us, the communications officer said. Put him on. The main screen shifted. Admiral Thaddeus Sterling appeared. He was not wearing a ceremonial uniform. His collar was open, his sleeves rolled up, his eyes dark and hard. Cree Commander, Sterling said. His voice was flat, deadly. You are in violation of a sovereign system. Withdraw your forces immediately, or we will turn your fleet into scrap metal. Vornak let out a low, grinding laugh. You are a long way from your borders, human. You have brought a fleet of garbage trucks to fight the apex predators of the galaxy. You have no treaties here. Why do you throw your lives away for a weak, dying race? Because they are our friends, Sterling said. And 40 years ago, you didn't exist to us. Today, you are in our way. Last chance, General. Turn around. I will mount your skull on my command console. Vornak snarled. He cut the feed. He turned to his tactical officer. They have rushed in blind. They rely on their automated targeting to hit us at range. Spring the snare. Activating the magnetic disruption net, General. Deep in the debris field surrounding the planet, a dozen stealth-cloaked Kree buoys powered up. They had been seated hours ago waiting for the Valkyrie to attempt an evacuation. Now they found a much larger target. The buoys detonated. They did not explode with fire. They exploded with a wave of concentrated hyperfrequency electromagnetic radiation. An EMP shockwave designed to completely scramble complex digital processors and targeting matrices. The wave hit the American fleet like a physical wall. On the bridge of the Retribution, the primary screens went black. The low hum of the massive military-grade reactors pitched up into a violent whine, then abruptly cut out. The bright tactical holotables died. The deck plunged into absolute darkness, save for the blood-red glow of analog emergency lights kicking on. Sterling grabbed the edge of the command table as the massive ship lurched. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making his stomach heave. Report! Sterling barked, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the dead bridge. Admiral, we've lost main power to the targeting arrays, his lieutenant shouted over the wail of emergency sirens. The Aegis combat system is offline. Automated point defense is dead. The EMP wave scrambled our firing algorithms. We can't lock onto the cruise ships. What about the civilian fleet? Worse, sir. The modern freighters are dead in the water. Navigation computers are completely fried. Sterling looked out the viewport. The Kree fleet had not been affected. Their ships were heavily insulated against their own weapons. And now they were moving. 87 dreadnoughts broke their blockade formation. They turned their massive glowing red plasma batteries toward the paralyzed human fleet. They lured us into a kill zone, Sterling whispered. The void lit up with Kree fire. Without the automated Aegis shields to deflect the incoming plasma, the human fleet took the strikes directly on their armor. Sterling watched in horror as a heavy Kree plasma bolt slammed into the side of the Starlight Dream. The luxury passenger liner, crewed only by a skeleton team of brave volunteers, was never meant for war. Its elegant white hull held for a fraction of a second before the heat melted through. The ship snapped in half. There was no sound in space, but Sterling felt the explosion in his bones. Debris escape pods and the frozen bodies of American sailors were violently expelled into the dark. The Starlight is gone, sir, the comms officer yelled, his voice breaking. I'm picking up distress calls across the grid. The Ironclad has lost its engines. The medical frigates are taking heavy fire. Sterling stared at the drifting wreckage of the passenger liner. A cold, suffocating weight pressed down on his chest. He had done this. He had asked them to come. He had bypassed the Pentagon, played to their honor, and led them into a slaughterhouse. General Hayes had been right. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a mass execution. The Kree were too advanced, their trap too perfect. Another explosion rocked the viewport. A human fuel tanker detonated briefly, creating a massive, terrifying sun in the middle of the battlefield. Admiral, the Retribution is taking fire, hull integrity at 80%. We are blind, sir. We can't hit them without the computer targeting. Sterling closed his eyes. The smell of burning wire and fear filled the bridge. He thought of his mother. He thought of the 12 lives saved 40 years ago. Now he was paying for those 12 lives with 10,000. He opened his eyes. They were no longer filled with doubt. They were filled with the cold, hard clarity of a man who has accepted his fate. Lieutenant, the military targeting is dead. But what about the analog systems? The manual overrides. Sir, manual firing of the main railguns is possible, but without the computer calculating the firing solutions based on the speed and trajectory, it's like throwing darts in the dark. We'd have to be point blank to guarantee a hit. And the civilian ships? Sterling asked, staring at the Big Bertha mining rig, which was currently shrugging off a plasma hit with its thick layers of rock and slag. Most of the heavy industry ships run on old hydraulic and analog systems, sir. They aren't sophisticated enough for the EMP to fry. They still have propulsion. Sterling grabbed the heavy wired analog microphone from the emergency comms panel. He bypassed the digital relays broadcasting on raw, unencrypted radio waves. It would be full of static. The Kree would hear every word. He didn't care. To all American vessels, this is Admiral Sterling. His voice crackled over the speakers of 300 battered ships. On the bridge of the Big Bertha, Captain Miller wiped blood from his forehead and listened. In the cell blocks of the Redemption, the inmates gripped the bulkheads and listened. On the surface of Valkyrie Prime, Elder Kalen closed his eyes and listened. We are blind. Our computers are dead. The Kree have us outgunned and outmaneuvered. Sterling looked out at the burning wreckage of his fleet. This is not the fight we planned for, and I will not lie to you. A lot of us are not going to make it home today. The odds are gone. He gripped the microphone tighter, his knuckles turning white. But look down. Look at that blue planet. There are 40,000 innocent souls down there who have never known war. 40 years ago, when our people were dying in the dark, they didn't run the numbers. They didn't calculate the odds. They just reached out their hands. Sterling's voice dropped, losing its military cadence, becoming the voice of a man speaking to his neighbors. That is what we do. We don't fight because it's easy. We fight because someone has to stand between the monsters and the weak. We fight because when an American gives their word, that word is etched in steel. He took a deep breath. The bridge of the Retribution was dead silent. I promised them we would remember, and I intend to keep that promise. All military vessels divert all remaining power from the computers to the engines. All civilian ships with heavy armor move to the front. Sterling looked directly at the massive Kree flagship in the distance. If we can't shoot them from out here, we are going to ram them down their throats. Form the wall. Nobody touches that planet. He dropped the microphone. Helm, Sterling ordered, his voice echoing like a gunshot. Full ahead, ramming speed. Take us right down the throat of the Kree flagship. Aye, Admiral, full ahead. The Retribution, stripped of its elegance, stripped of its high-tech grace, fired its massive thrusters. The 3-mile-long carrier lurched forward, an unstoppable block of gray iron accelerating through the void. Across the comms, a chaotic chorus of roars, curses, and battle cries erupted. Captain Miller of the Big Bertha slammed his hydraulic levers forward. You heard the Admiral fire up the plasma drills. We're going to open these ugly bastards up like tin cans. Warden Gates on the Redemption looked at his inmates who had broken into the armory and were manually loading the heavy mass driver cannons. Lock down the throttle, aim for their engine blocks. The human fleet stopped trying to retreat. They stopped trying to fix their computers. They surged forward. General Vornak watched the tactical display on the Annihilator. His confident sneer faltered. General, his tactical officer said, panic bleeding into his guttural voice. The humans, they are not retreating. They are breaking standard engagement ranges. They are accelerating directly into our firing arcs. Focus fire, Vornak roared. Burn them out of the sky. They have no shields. The Kree dreadnoughts unleashed hell. Searing beams of red plasma tore into the charging human fleet. A medical frigate, completely unarmed, deliberately thrust itself into the path of a plasma bolt meant for a crippled destroyer. The frigate vaporized, but the destroyer survived its engines flaring as it drove a manual torpedo directly into a Kree cruiser's bridge. The Big Bertha took 3 direct hits. Its outer layers of industrial slag melted, but the massive mining rig didn't slow down. It slammed physically into the side of a Kree dreadnought. The screech of tearing metal reverberated through the hulls. The Bertha's forward plasma drills ignited, boring a hole straight through the alien armor, venting the Kree ship's atmosphere in a catastrophic blowout. The American fleet had become a wall of flying shrapnel rage and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. They were taking horrific losses, but for every ship that burned, 2 more pushed through the wreckage, closing the distance. On the surface of the planet, Vera watched the sky turn into a maelstrom of fire and debris. She watched the unarmed human ships throwing themselves in front of the Kree cannons to protect the others. "They are dying for us," Vera whispered, her voice trembling with awe and horror. "They are sacrificing themselves. Why? Why do they do this?" Elder Kalen watched the burning sky. He thought of Alara Sterling, her fierce eyes and her unbreakable promise. "Because, Vera," Kalen said softly, "they are human, and heaven help anyone who stands between a human and their honor." High above, the Retribution plunged through the chaos, an unyielding spear aimed directly at the heart of the Kree Empire. The final battle had begun, and the Void would remember the price of it forever. The void of space became a slaughterhouse. There was no elegance to it, no sweeping tactical maneuvers. It was a bar brawl in the dark, fought with million-ton machines and raw, bleeding desperation. The American fleet had lost their computers. They had lost their targeting algorithms. They had lost the sophisticated dance of modern naval warfare. So they fought like their grandfathers. They fought with their hands on the manual yokes, with iron sights, and with their engines burning white-hot. General Vornak watched the tactical feed on the bridge of the Annihilator. For the first time in his long, bloody life, the Kree commander felt the cold prickle of genuine terror. "They are not breaking formation!" His tactical officer screamed, the guttural clicks of his native language dissolving into panic. "General, they are taking direct hits, and they are not breaking." "Concentrate fire on their center line," Vornak roared. "Burn the flagship." But the flagship was not alone. As a barrage of superheated red plasma streaked toward the crippled hull of the Retribution, 3 civilian ships broke from the American formation. A heavy freight hauler, a water tanker, and a retrofitted deep space trawler. They had no weapons. They had no military shielding. They simply threw their massive engines into overdrive and slid directly into the path of the Kree plasma volley. The impacts were blinding. The freight hauler vaporized instantly, its cargo of titanium ore turning into a cloud of molten shrapnel. The water tanker detonated, flashing its payload into a massive cloud of superheated steam that briefly blinded the Kree sensors. They died. Completely. Instantly. But behind the expanding clouds of vapor and shrapnel, the Retribution survived. Admiral Thaddeus Sterling stood on his darkened bridge, illuminated only by the flashing red emergency strobes. He watched the civilian ships sacrifice themselves to buy him another minute of life. His jaw was clenched so hard his teeth ached. He didn't issue a command. He didn't have to. Every captain in that fleet knew what was at stake. "Helm," Sterling growled, his voice a low rumble over the wailing sirens. "Bring us into the debris field. Put us right on top of they. We use the wreckage as cover." "Aye, Admiral, taking us in." The Retribution surged forward, diving into the expanding cloud of destroyed ships. The Kree dreadnoughts, massive and heavily armored, were designed for long-range orbital bombardment. They were artillery pieces. They were not designed for a knife fight in a phone booth. And the Americans were bringing the knives. Out of the steam and debris, the Big Bertha emerged. The colossal mining rig looked like a mechanical nightmare. Its hull was a patchwork of melted slag and jagged steel. It was venting atmosphere from a dozen breaches, but its forward plasma drills were spinning at maximum velocity. A Kree cruiser tried to turn, trying to bring its broadside batteries to bear. It was too slow. Captain Miller of the Big Bertha didn't even try to fire a projectile. He just drove the million-ton mining rig straight into the side of the Kree cruiser. The impact shuddered through the void. The Bertha's massive tungsten carbide drills, designed to crack open solid asteroids, bit into the sleek black armor of the Kree ship. Metal shrieked. Sparks the size of city blocks showered into the vacuum. "Chew 'em up," Miller's voice crackled over the open analog frequency, raw and ragged. "Keep those drills hot, don't let them breathe." The drills tore through the cruiser's outer hull, chewing into the engineering decks. Secondary explosions rippled along the spine of the Kree vessel. Within seconds, the cruiser's main reactor went critical. The resulting explosion threw the Big Bertha backward. Its forward drills melted into useless lumps of metal, but the Kree ship was completely severed in half. On the bridge of the Annihilator, Vornak gripped the console. His claws dug into the metal. "General," the sensory officer yelled, "we have lost the Vanguard. The humans are inside our minimum firing range. Our plasma batteries cannot track them. They are too close." "Then crush them," Vornak demanded. "Ram them. We cannot. They are actively seeking collisions. They do not care if they survive, General. They only care that we die." It was a truth Vornak's mind struggled to process. The Kree Empire conquered because other species valued survival. Other species surrendered to preserve their lives. You could not conquer an enemy who had already accepted death. You could only kill them. And killing these humans was costing the Empire its greatest fleet. Suddenly, the proximity alarms on the Annihilator screamed, a deafening high-pitched wail that filled the vast command deck. "Target closing!" the tactical officer shrieked. "Direct trajectory, 0.05, relative distance and accelerating." Vornak looked out the main viewport. Bursting through the wreckage of a burning Kree destroyer was a massive, blocky ship. Its hull was painted in faded orange and gray. The words "United States Penitentiary Ship," "Redemption" were barely visible under the scorch marks of a dozen plasma hits. The ship was dying. Its port side engine nacelle was completely sheared off. Its hull was bleeding oxygen in long, freezing white trails. But its main thrusters were burning with the intensity of a dying star. Admiral Sterling heard the radio crackle on the bridge of the Retribution. "Admiral," a voice rasped through the heavy static. It was Warden Gates. He sounded exhausted. He sounded at peace. "We've lost life support on decks 3 through 9. Steering is gone. We've got about 2 minutes of juice left in the main reactor before she goes cold." Sterling stared at the tactical plot, watching the trajectory of the crippled prison ship. "Warden, divert your remaining power to escape pods. Get your people out." "No pods left, Admiral. They got shot off 10 minutes ago." Gates coughed a wet, heavy sound. "I'm standing here with 80 men. Murderers, thieves, lifers. Society threw them away. But today they are American sailors, and they want to leave a mark." Sterling closed his eyes. The bridge was completely silent. "Warden, we've locked the helm, Admiral. We've bypassed the reactor safeties. We are making a run at the big boy." Sterling opened his eyes and looked at the massive wedge of the Kree flagship, the Annihilator. It was a fortress of black metal. "It's been an honor, Admiral. Give them hell for us." The radio clicked off. On the bridge of the Redemption, Warden Gates dropped the microphone. He looked at the men standing around him. They were bleeding. They were covered in soot and grease. Some wore the uniforms of guards. Most wore the orange jumpsuits of inmates. In the dim emergency lighting, you couldn't tell the difference. They were just men, standing at the end of all things. "All right, boys," Gates said quietly, putting his hand on the throttle. "Let's show the galaxy how we pay our debts." He shoved the throttle all the way forward and broke the lever off. The Redemption surged. It didn't try to evade the incoming Kree fire. It took the plasma bolts head on. The forward armor melted away, exposing the skeletal framework of the ship, but the massive mass driver core at the center of the vessel remained intact. General Vornak watched the burning orange ship fill his viewport. "Evasive!" Vornak screamed, his voice breaking into a frantic, terrified pitch. "Evasive action. Helm, turn us. Bring the forward shields to maximum." "They are failing, General. We cannot turn in time." The Kree flagship, massive and lumbering, tried to bank away. It was too late. The Redemption slammed into the dead center of the Annihilator's command spire at 30,000 miles per hour. The kinetic force of the impact was apocalyptic. The prison ship didn't just crash. It drove itself deep into the armored guts of the Kree flagship like a tungsten spike. The heavy kinetic mass driver core of the Redemption breached the Annihilator's primary plasma manifolds. For a fraction of a second, the universe held its breath. Then the Annihilator ruptured. A shockwave of blue and red energy blasted outward, tearing the black armor of the flagship to ribbons. The command spire where General Vornak had stood, declaring his supremacy just an hour before, was instantly vaporized. The massive dreadnought broke into three burning, jagged pieces, tumbling out of control into the void. The heart of the Kree fleet had been ripped out. Silence descended on the American comm channels, a heavy, breathless awe. They watched the debris of the enemy flagship drift past their viewports. They had done the impossible. They had struck down a god of war. Without their flagship, without their commander, the Kree discipline shattered. The remaining dreadnoughts, battered and bleeding from the relentless close-quarters human assault, stopped firing. The swarm intelligence of the Empire broke under the terrifying realization that they were fighting an enemy that could not be intimidated. "Admiral," the sensory officer on the Retribution whispered, "the Kree, they are spooling up their hyperdrives." Sterling stood rigidly by the command table. He leaned heavily on his knuckles, his breathing ragged. He watched the red dots on the analog radar screen begin to flicker. One by one, the massive Kree warships turned their tails to Valkyrie Prime. The void flashed as hyperspace windows tore open. The remnants of the invincible armada fled, retreating into the deep black, leaving their dead behind. They were gone. Sterling didn't cheer. Nobody on the bridge of the Retribution cheered. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than the noise of the guns. It was the silence of a graveyard. The space above Valkyrie Prime was choked with debris. Millions of tons of twisted metal, frozen atmosphere, and shattered glass drifted lazily in the planet's gravity well. The elegant white hulls of the medical frigates, the jagged slag of the mining rigs, the scarred gray armor of the military destroyers. They were all mixed together in a silent, floating monument to human defiance. "Damage report," Sterling said. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the dark bridge. The lieutenant at the tactical station had tears running down his face. He wiped his jaw with the back of a trembling hand. "Admiral, the blockade is broken. The planetary shield is holding. The Kree have evacuated the sector." The fleet lieutenant, "Give me the numbers." The young officer swallowed hard. He looked at the analog tally sheet. 43 ships, sir. Complete loss of hull integrity. No life signs. The Starlight, the Ironclad, the Redemption, they are all gone. 43 ships. Sterling closed his eyes. The weight of it settled onto his shoulders, a physical pressure that bowed his spine. 43 captains who had answered his call. Thousands of mechanics, medics, prisoners, and sailors who had thrown themselves into the fire because he had asked them to remember a promise. They had bought the dawn with their blood. "Send out the search and rescue shuttles," Sterling ordered quietly. "We leave no one behind in the dark. Bring our people home." "Aye, Admiral." "And prep a dropship. I am going down to the surface." 2 hours later, a battered United States Space Command Pelican dropship pierced the atmosphere of Valkyrie Prime. The sky above the capital city was no longer burning. It was a soft, bruised violet streaked with the contrails of human rescue shuttles moving through the upper atmosphere. The planetary shield had been lowered. The air that rushed into the dropship's open bay smelled of ozone-burnt soil and the sweet scent of alien flora. Sterling stood at the ramp. He was still wearing his grease-stained work uniform. He hadn't bothered to put on his dress coat. He hadn't bothered to wipe the soot from his face. He was not here as a politician. He was here as a sailor who had just buried his crew. The dropship touched down in the center of the refugee camp. Thousands of Valkyries stood in absolute silence. They were clustered around the landing pad, their large yellow eyes fixed on the gray metal ship. They had watched the sky burn. They had watched the strange, blocky ships of the humans throw themselves into the cannons of the Kree Empire. They knew the price that had been paid for their breath. The ramp lowered with a heavy hydraulic hiss. Admiral Thaddeus Sterling walked down into the alien dirt. The crowd parted for him. There was no cheering. There was a profound, almost religious reverence. Valkyrie mothers held their children, tightly pressing their hands to their hearts as the tall, gray-haired human walked past. At the end of the path, standing near the control console of the spaceport, was Captain Vera. Beside her, leaning heavily on his metal walker, was Elder Kalen. Sterling stopped 3 feet away from the old alien. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other across the gulf of species, across the gulf of 40 years. Kalen saw the exhaustion in the human's eyes. He saw the grief. He saw the exact same fiercely stubborn jawline that he had seen on a dying woman 4 decades ago. "You are Alara's one," Kalen said. His voice was a rasping whisper translated perfectly by the device at his belt. "I am," Sterling replied. His voice was thick with emotion. Kalen looked up at the sky. He looked at the streaks of debris still catching the sunlight in orbit. "I asked her once why humans push so far into the dark, why you are so reckless. She told me it was because you had to see what was over the next horizon." The old man lowered his gaze back to Sterling. "You have lost so much today. Your people, they threw themselves into the fire." "Why?" Sterling reached into the deep pocket of his stained uniform. His thick, scarred fingers pulled out a small object. It was the heavy metal recording device. The exact same device his mother had handed to a young Valkyrie captain 40 years ago. Sterling held it out. "Because you taught us that there is light over the horizon, Elder," Sterling said softly. "When my mother's ship was dying, you didn't look at the laws of your empire. You didn't look at the odds. You looked at 12 terrified strangers, and you chose mercy." Kalen stared at the device in Sterling's hand. His green scales seemed to pale. His hand shook as he reached out and took the cold metal. "You saved 12 lives that day," Sterling continued, his voice echoing across the silent plaza. "Those 12 people went home. They had children. They had grandchildren. Thousands of human beings exist today because of you. My children exist because of you. Every sailor in that fleet up there knows the story of the Veskari captain who wouldn't let humanity die in the dark." Kalen gripped the recorder. A single clear tear fell from his yellow eye, tracing a path down his weathered cheek to land on the dusty ground. "I was punished for it," Kalen whispered. "My government stripped me of my command. They said I was a fool for risking our neutrality for a primitive species." Sterling stepped forward. He placed his large, heavy hand over Kalen's frail, trembling fingers. "You were no fool, Kalen. You were a friend, and humanity pays its debts. Always." Vira watched them. The young captain felt a tightness in her throat that she could not swallow down. She looked at the human admiral, at the soot on his face and the sorrow in his eyes. He had brought an armada of civilians, criminals, and soldiers to fight the most terrifying force in the galaxy, all for a promise made before he was even a man. "How can we ever repay this?" Vira asked, her voice breaking. "Your ships, your people, the cost is too high." Sterling turned to look at the young captain. He gave her a small, sad smile, a smile that carried the weight of the 43 crews resting in the silent void above. "You don't repay it, Captain," Sterling said. "You just pass it on. You survive, you rebuild, and the next time you see someone dying in the dark, you reach out your hand." He stepped back and snapped a crisp, perfect military salute to the old Valkyrie elder. It was a gesture of absolute, peerless respect. Kalen, trembling, raised his own hand and returned the gesture as best he could. 6 months later, the sky above Valkyrie Prime was busy again. But it was no longer a sky of fear. Massive orbital construction yards floated in the upper atmosphere. Humans and Valkyrie worked side by side in the zero-gravity environment. The sparks of welding torches flashed like tiny stars against the deep violet backdrop. They were building a station, not a human station, not a Valkyrie station, a joint defense grid. It was massive, heavily armed, and completely unhidden. It was a statement anchored in steel and plasma. In the center of the station's grand promenade, a monument had been erected. It was not a statue of a general or a carving of a glorious battle. It was a simple wall of black granite. Carved into the stone were the names of 43 American ships: the Starlight Dream, the Ironclad, the Big Bertha, the Redemption. Beneath the ships were the names of the thousands of men and women who had died in the skies above a world they had never seen, protecting a people they had never met. And at the very center of the wall, encased in armored glass, rested an antique heavy metal recording device. The story did not stay on Valkyrie Prime. It could not be contained. Traders passing through the sector saw the massive new defense grid. They heard the comms chatter in English and Valkyrie. They asked questions, and the Valkyrie told them the story. They told the galaxy about the day the Kree Empire came with fire and death. They told the galaxy about the blue planetary shield failing and the absolute certainty of annihilation. And then they told them about the sky tearing open. They told them about the gray ships, the garbage scows, the prison transports, the medical frigates. They told them about a species so fiercely, terrifyingly loyal that they would gladly fly 1,000,000 tons of burning steel down the throat of an empire just to settle a 40-year-old bar tab of honor. The story spread. It jumped from trading posts to core worlds. It whispered through the shadows of the galactic syndicates and echoed in the halls of alien senates. The Kree Empire never returned to the Artemis sector. Their borders contracted. The fear of waking the sleeping giant of Earth kept their armadas tethered close to home. The universe is a vast, cold, and often cruel place. Empires rise on the backs of slaves, and civilizations fall in silence, their screams swallowed by the infinite vacuum. For millennia, the rule of the galaxy was simple. The strong survive and the weak perish. But a new rule had been written. It was written in the blood of American sailors and etched into the star charts of every navigator who flew the deep black. It was a simple rule, a terrifying, beautiful promise that changed the geometry of interstellar politics forever. If you find a human in the dark and you offer them your hand, you will never be alone again. Because when you call for help, the humans will come. Always.